morning, everyone. As Elaine said, I'm Doug Bourne, Professor of Development Education, University College London. I'm pleased to introduce Veronica Boix Mansilla, who will be speaking in a moment about what kind of learning are we looking for in global education today. Veronica is very well known in the field, led the program on Project Zero. She's very well known in initiatives around OECD's work on global competencies. And we're really pleased that she could be with us to speak today. But before she does, I want to say a couple of things, and I'd like us all to show our support, not just for her, but for the university at which she's based, which is Harvard University. We have witnessed in the last few days and weeks a direct assault on academic freedom in one university, probably one of the leading universities in the world. I heard overnight there's plans to give no more visas to international students at Harvard University. The whole sense behind this initiative is a direct assault on academic freedom and education. So what I'd like us all to do is to stand and show our solidarity with Harvard University today. Thank you, everyone. Okay. So sorry for doing that, Veronica, but I thought it's important that we recognize the context within which this conference is taking place. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Veronica for her presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Doug. Thank you all for this incredibly moving moment of connection. I want to begin by saying that every single human being who would like to visit our university is more than welcome. We will embrace you, we will hug you, we will think with you, and it's quite ironic because I must say that internally at the university, we're the first critics of what we do. We're permanently trying to change, permanently trying to be in check with ourselves and assumptions and power relationships. But today is a moment of pride. And today is, for me, a moment of enormous gratitude for what you just did. Thank you. Thank you very much. All right, so what kind of learning are we looking for? And how might we think about this at this issue? I'd like to sort of begin also by thanking you, thanking Liam, thanking Doug, thanking everybody for this invitation. I have been sort of following a little bit of the work that Angel is doing, that Jean is doing, and always been very impressed by this possibility of dialogue across differences, dialogue across perspectives. And after studying interdisciplinarity for some time, I came to realize that when we enter in dialogue, whether we come from research, we come from NGOs, we come from policy, it's not just ideas that we're exchanging. We're exchanging biographies. We're exchanging decisions that we have made at some point in our lives to become economists, to become sociologists, to become educators. And this is what we bring in our lenses that enrich the possibility of growth at that intersection. So it's really quite nice to see sort of the energy in the intersection here today. I think that the panel preceding this talk really make the strong case for the importance of this intersection, the importance of this dialogue, and also the urgency of global education as a matter of ecological, environmental, social, cultural, democratic survival. So I will not try to make the case again. So what I would like to do is to give you a little bit of background, background about myself, my work, and the research from which I'm coming to you with, to share some ideas for us to discuss. We will look at the learner that we're looking for, so the kind of learning that we seek, and towards the end, perhaps think a little bit about some implications for practice and for policy and for research. So, beginning with a little bit about me, I was born in Argentina, and I happened to grow up and enter the university. Many of you are students or faculty at universities. Enter the university right at the moment in which the end of a very, very harsh dictatorship was taking place. So this is an incredible time for a university like the University of Buenos Aires to exist, because it's a university with a very clear sense of mission. It's about rebuilding a society from the crumbles, from the rubble, and it's a generation with an incredible purpose, which is to contribute to the reconstruction of the society that we had lost. We had no social sciences, we had no criticality left in the official spaces. It was about that time when I was trying to become a social scientist and taking a course on qualitative methods, and part of it involved learning how to observe systematically. And because I was interested in education, of course, I was observing a classroom. This is a 10th grade classroom in which the children were learning history. And as it happened at the time, our streets were packed with demonstrations for human rights, demonstrations for bringing the junta to trial. So it was a very active, really engaging time. And as this teacher in this 10th grade classroom was teaching, a big demonstration happened right on the streets next to the school. And as it happens in Buenos Aires, they involve bombos and a lot of noise, a lot of music, chanting. And the children, of course, like any of us perhaps would do, run to the window to try to either, encourage the event or observe. And the teacher waited for a few minutes, looked at me in some form of complicity. I'm taking notes crazily about what's happening right then. And then she does something that I think marked the rest of my career in education. She clapped her hands and said, okay, chicos, children, back to reality. And I stopped writing, right? So which one is reality? And I think that part of the challenge we have in education is that reality is moving in one stream, and our classrooms are staying in another alternative reality that children recognize as not the reality of the real reality, so to speak. That sounded almost Colombian, but that's the challenge. And I think that the beauty of global education is exactly that, is that it brings the world, as complex as it may be, as difficult as it may be, into the classroom for deliberation, for analysis, for study, and for action and participation. So the work that I'll share with you today has, a bit of that, element, and I think that has been sort of my work overall. The ID Global Project, which is what I lead at Project Zero, there's a research institute at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. So the kind of research that we do is very much embedded in practice. So our work is, we call it transdisciplinary, in the sense that it involves perspectives from disciplines as well as from actors in the field, so to speak, teachers, students. We work quite a bit with what we call participatory design-based research, which means that we embed ourselves, and here you have some images. So in this case, we do quite a bit of work with seminars and interdisciplinary seminars to try to understand their existing research and advance some new frameworks. We do quite a bit of work with schools, with museums, with cultural institutions, with learning centers, really in the process of modifying the reality, engaging in growth, engaging in analysis, and participating together with our teachers, together with the museum educators, in reflecting about change. So I like to say that in most of our research, we have two reports. One is a written report of what we have learned by engaging with colleagues in the field in change, and the other is the lived report, which is the museum programs. It's the district, initiatives. It's the classrooms that look differently as we do this work. This has clearly sort of a very strong influence from the tradition of pragmatism of Freire, Dewey, Jerome Bruner is a great influence as well. So along sort of, I'd say, the last 15 years in which I've been focusing on global education, there are a number of projects that took different qualities, many of them very much involved in sort of the collection of best practices, like some of the work with the International Baccalaureate sort of early on. Some of them involved this like partnership in change with practitioners, such as our work on interdisciplinarity and our work with districts and our work with museums. And some of it involves sort of the integration of existing research and articulation of new frameworks, such as the work with the OECD, some current work with UNESCO and AFS. So there's a sort of a variety of pieces. So what I share with you sort of is informed in a way by this. The learning that we seek. If there's one idea that I would love for us to consider as we move forward in these 2 days, is the possibility that the kind of learning that we seek is not only relevant, we know that, is not only deep, we know that, but it is also long-lasting and transformative. So in the work that we're building on, we have the Dublin Declaration that sort of seeks to frame global education in a very sort of open umbrella that allows us to do an enormous amount of work, whether we're interested in human rights, we're interested in migration, we're interested in sort of global and internationalizing children's minds, if you wish. And I like the definition of global education, this broad, encompassing, inclusive idea of global education as enabling people to reflect critically on the world and their place in it, to open their eyes, hearts, minds to the realities of the world at the local and global levels, to empower people to understand, imagine, and hope, and act to bring about a world of social and climate justice, peace, solidarity, equity, equality, planetary sustainability, and international understanding. I continue reading. It involves respect for human rights and diversity, inclusion, and a decent life for all, now and into the future. Global education, the Declaration states, encompasses a broad range of educational provisions, formal, non-formal, informal, lifelong, life-wide. And we consider it essential to the transformative power of and transformation of education. So this is a very broad and aspirational description of the kind of work that we're hoping to do. I think it's a very well-framed description, because not only does it address the kinds of habits of mind and heart that we might want to cultivate among young people, but also the kinds of societies that we're looking for. And every decision that we make as educators, every day in the classroom, in our research labs, or in policy, is always sort of framed by the narratives that we have about the societies in which we live and the societies we would like to build. So in that sense, I find that to be very powerful. What does this look like in practice? Let me show you a couple of examples. What does this kind of global learning might look like in practice? Because part of the challenge that we see is that we have declarations, we have our policies, we have our teacher professional development, and what we hear permanently is, okay, so how do we do it? What does it look like when it's done well? So my intention here is to show a little bit of what we see in the work that we do with teachers and with educators. So this is a classroom in the Netherlands. This is a biology teacher who has been mapping pandemics for many years. She began with Ebola Zika, and of course, by the time in which COVID came, she knew a little bit how to do it. So it's a very interesting pedagogy by which she brings an enormous piece of paper at the library at the center of the school, and the children ask questions, not necessarily disciplinary questions, questions of, how does this get contaged, who is responsible, who's affected, what are the policies and so forth. And then they go into disciplinary understanding to try to find some of the responses, some of the answers to that. So this mapping pandemics is one of the practices. In this particular case, you see children young people who are trying to understand in mathematics, sort of logarithmics, functions, linear and non-linear functions. But it so happens that the teacher hears on the radio, very much like looking out the window, hears on the radio this construct of planetary capacity, right? So how many people can a planet hold? And he brings that as the theme in which, the context in which these young students are going to be learning their math. So it's an entirely different way of thinking about math, because it's math as a tool for seeing more, for making informed decisions, and therefore in this particular case, to then interact with other people, other young people in other countries, to look at questions of, population control, family planning, and so forth. In this particular case, just in case for some of the folks that at some point said, oh, you cannot teach global competence or global education in the early years, the children are too little to be tackling complex and difficult issues. So our research sort of shows that, number one, that children are hearing the stories, the children are in front of the TV, the children are already sort of in touch with the complexities of our worlds, and what we owe them, perhaps, is the possibility of making sense of them. So what you see in this sort of very joyful picture is children who are a whole year studying sort of in early childhood environmental, it's an environmental sort of investigation by which they are sort of learning to commit to the understanding of particular species, and eventually sort of ending with a very joyful celebration of the world, taking action on behalf of the planet, as they say, in the streets of Washington, D.C. And what we see here is a very interesting, too, image of stop motion videos, sort of that constructed by children in Greece and Syrian young children, early childhood too, by which through the construction of a digital story, they get to understand the stories of migration, the exit from northern Africa and from Syria into the future of a cohesive society and a sort of a hopeful future, created also with Play-Doh by the children into what will be the new home in Greece or in Germany, I might say. That's their aspiration for many families. The girl you see on this, your right side, is a koala. And I would love for us to come to know a koala a little bit better, because I think that she has a lot to teach us. In the next few minutes, I would like to sort of introduce her to you, tell you a little bit about her work, and then invite you to hear her talk about her own learning. Again, always with the question of what is the kind of learning that we seek? What's the kind of learning that we seek? So Akwal is the daughter of a refugee woman from South Sudan, living in Portland, Maine, in the United States. Portland is a secondary arrival city for many immigrant families, and the educational system has experienced what many educational systems have, sort of in the global north, of a move from 6% immigrant students and families to 27% in a matter of 7 years. That's a very, very fast shift for teachers who are not necessarily always prepared for so many changes. So it turns out that Akwal finds out that she is the niece of one of the lost boys of Sudan. She doesn't understand exactly what that means. The teacher begins to explain what that means. And in the process of a project that they have in the English class, in the language class, of learning how to write in different genres, the teacher invites the children to explore the library and see whose stories are being told in the library. The children find out that there are not too many stories from Sudan, not too many stories from Iraq or from Afghanistan or from all of the families represented in the city. So they set out to write those stories and to publish the stories so that others could read them. Akwal interviews her mom, writes the stories, and it's the principle of this teacher that she will emphasize perspective taking as a thread throughout the year. So Akwal comes up with the idea of writing her story through 3 perspectives. The story of Mayok, her uncle, the lost boy of Sudan. Her story, Maria, she gives herself a different name, and the story of her mother. They all reunited in the United States after Mayok was rescued and taken to the United States. So here's what Akwal says about her story, or throughout the process of building her story. So she says, so Mayok never fled with his mom. That's how I took it. I heard what my mom was saying, and I took it from that perspective. She said Kakuma, so I used that in my story, but I researched it more because I didn't know what it was. I found out Kakuma was a refugee camp, and I think it's hard to come to America. This is from my mom's perspective. And I'm going to tear up. She's like in the initial interview, sharing a little bit about what she's thinking about her story. Eventually, she reflects and says, I think that the history of Sudan is a great thing to write about. Some people know the lost boys as a group of boys who were just lost. They were not lost. Think, she's in 5th grade. They were not just lost. They were captured. Some were tending cattle. And it says here, pointing to her text, I got captured when I was tending cattle. They brought me to a refugee camp, and I had to hide a lot of things. The boys had to hide a lot of things because they could be killed for having pictures of their families. So I included that in my story too. So Akwal here is really dealing with a very, very complex story and dealing with this complex story in multiple perspectives. We wondered what was left after the children wrote the stories, published the stories, distributed the books in the libraries in the city and the school system. So we came back and interviewed Akwal a year later. And what you'll see in this interview is a little bit of our earlier interview with her in the beginning of this video that you'll see, and then how she remembers and how she recalls and what was left about this whole idea of perspective taking. What I would love to do is to invite you to keep in mind the question of what kind of learning do we seek, and really try to see what calls your attention about the learning that Akwal is showing a year after she had this experience that she's describing. So can we show the video?
Can I ask you a question? Sorry, what gave you the idea to write it from these different perspectives in the first place?
I learned in reading class.
Yeah.
My homeroom teacher and reading teacher too.
If you want me to pause, if you want to say something, let me know, and I can stop it.
The teacher next door just stopped it, and they were talking about perspective, and I really didn't know what a perspective was.
Pause it.
Yeah.
I remember now. I remember. It was a day when Miss Mountain and Miss Smith were talking about perspective, and they read a book, and I was like, whoa, what are these perspectives? I don't know the word. And so then I was like, what if I put this in my story and had different perspectives of people that they wouldn't know they could tell whose perspective it was, because I had bold letters saying Maria's perspective, John's perspective, Mary's perspective, my voice. I remember that day, and then Miss Mountain said it would be a good idea if I did that. I remember, and Miss Smith said it would be a good idea. I remember that.
And do you think that it turned out well, doing it that way? And are there any things that are hard about getting
Yes. Yes, there is. There's a lot of things that's wrong about it. It's hard about it. I mean, like, I have to think of something.
It's okay, you can take time.
Like, what they say, you don't know their personality, you're making up the personality. Like, if you accidentally say, this person hates singing, but the person's singing in the story. That's hard. That's the hard part of the perspective of a story. Like, you have to edit. You have to edit a lot in perspectives, and like the timeline of it. If you're doing different types of perspectives, they have to have a timeline. Like my story in the beginning, I had a timeline when, like, after Majok left, Mary was talking and talking 30 days after. So I wanted it to be like, here's his whole perspective, this is his whole story. And I wanted to mix it around. In reading in LA class now, I'm the best person in that class to do perspective work. Like, this all started just in 5th grade. And I would love to thank those teachers for that. I would love to thank Miss Smith and Miss Nunn for teaching me that. Perspective work is really important in life, though, because you will find out how it is to be in that person's shoes and how they want to. Like, for example, if a bully's picking on someone, you don't know how they feel in their shoes. You don't know what they're going through. You don't know anything about them, but you're picking on them, and that's just making them stress. And so if you're writing about that person, you know how they feel. You can predict how they feel. You can infer, from all these texts, I infer that the person's feeling sad and that it is going through a lot. And they don't know that part of. That's important about perspectives. You have to know how the person feels, how the person acts, looking through the eyes of someone. Like, have you guys heard the song of Katy Perry, Roar? She has the eye of the tigers. That part is like she's has the perspective of a tiger. You can see through your eyes and see their perspective. From a perspective, you can act like a person, like that person, like for a whole day, and you'll see the perspectives of it. Like in the music video of hers, she says, "I got the eye of the tiger, the fire, dancing through the fire." She has the perspective of the tiger, and you know that by what she's saying. And she's like, "And you're gonna hear me roar." And that's a perspective.
Very interesting. So she seems to have a whole method about how you take perspective, right? You'd have to walk in people's shoes. You have to pay attention to the feelings. You have to look through the eye, right? Like the tiger, the eye of the tiger. So, but it's like this collective approach. She has a whole system by which, she can articulate that she created herself about, how to take perspective. So fascinating observation. It doesn't seem to be just a cognitive thing for her anymore. And of course, it has an enormous cognitive component. But it's emotional and it's identity-driven. Like it has become like part of who she is, part of a habit, part of something that she brings outside of, the context of the classroom. And when we talk about this transfer, right, transfer of what she learns in the classroom to everyday life, to interpreting popular music and so forth, sort of at Project Zero, we call this learning of dispositions. And we have a strong tradition of dispositional theories of learning, by which we think that this type of learning has to do of the following. Thinking, we come out of a tradition of thinking, critical thinking, creative thinking, dispositions. So for you to have a disposition in this very technical sense, you need to have the ability to take perspective, to really engage in the behavior or engage in the act of taking perspective. But you also have to have a sensitivity for conditions in the world outside the moment of learning in which this ability is handy. So or could be brought to use. So perspective taking is something that we can do every day in everyday life, as Akwal shows. But we don't always do it, in part because we don't recognize that this is an opportunity for me to take perspective. This is a moment in which I should be taking perspective. And sometimes we recognize the moment, but we really don't recognize that we have the energy or the motivation for doing it. So we call it an inclination or motivation to taking perspective or to being, taking a critical stance, or to reason with evidence, or to identify injustices. So in sort of the work that we do, at least, and I would like to bring it to you simply as a point of conversation, we really aspire for a type of learning that is dispositional, in this technical sense of dispositional, in which you're blending sort of multiple, we don't distinguishing as sharply between like the skill, the knowledge. So it's really dispositional in the sense of habits of mind that can be applied in a variety of disciplines, in a variety of contexts, in everyday life, and that become part of who we are. So the thing about this type of learning is that it is learned through enculturation. It is learned through many cases of encounters with models, people who take perspective well. It is learned through projects over and over in which perspective taking becomes, the core theme across, through a culture, a classroom culture, in which it was impossible to walk into a classroom without noticing that there was something going on about perspectives. Because every 5 minutes into the class, one child would say, from my perspective, and the teacher would ask, and what is your perspective? So perspective became like the air that you breathe in this classroom, the air that children breathe. And we learn deeply through the enculturation into the air that we breathe in a culture of classroom that is, in this case, about perspective taking, right? So you see there are several initiatives, if you wish. So very briefly, what might this mean in terms of nurturing global dispositions? Well, it might mean that because dispositions are learned through enculturation, we need to do more than having a particular curriculum or a particular set of skills. What we need is to engage in creating a culture of global learning in a classroom, in a school, in a university. This means ample opportunities for experiencing. This experiential phenomenological component is really important, not just cognitive, but really emotional, identity. It's about models of perspective taking, peers as models, teachers as models, curriculum content, historical actors as models, novelists, writers, artists as models. That there's a language, in this case, of perspective taking that sort of is infused in the things that are happening in the classroom, and the language that signals that perspective taking matters in this particular context. Children are very good about understanding what are the rules of the game in one classroom versus another. When I always say my children are very good about understanding what the rules of the game are when they're with their father or when they're with me. The kids adapt to this. They understand culture, microcultures in very, very keen ways. So we can really sort of invite them to participate in cultures that are desirable in that sense. Space, you would walk into a classroom like this and you would see kids' words, kids thinking around the walls. The space echoes or models of perspective taking, or models of global actors. And time, sort of deep allocation of time. This is not something that is learned in one unit and then we pass to unit 3. It's something that remains over time. So a question that a teacher may have for the whole year is, how can we get better at taking perspective? And this is something that children revisit, over time. So it's this long-term type of learning, a long-term engagement. And eventually, routines. Classrooms are filled with routines. Children know where to sit, where to put the backpacks, when to be quiet, when to speak, how to raise their hands to talk. These are routines. And they're typically behavioral routines, management routines. So what we're very interested in is the provocation of, what about thinking routines? What about making perspective taking a routine? What about making global thinking a routine? What if, for everything that we teach, we ask 3 questions? How does this matter to me? How does it matter to my people? How does it matter to the world? What if, for everything we teach, we ask the question of, what makes you say that? What if, across everything we teach, is that we ask the question of, what might be another perspective on this? So these are very, very small interventions, pedagogical interventions, that when they become routines in a classroom, they have at least the opportunity, gives us at least the opportunity that the children themselves will be the ones embracing them and using them and leading them. So it's transforming the interactions in the classroom by making children's thinking visible and by instituting these small-scale routines. The 3 whys. Why matter to me? Why does it matter to my people, my place? Why does it matter to the world? Or see, think, wonder, keen observation, interpretation, question asking. So very small. At Project Zero, if you Google it, you'll have like 80 of these, that we use for different purposes. But I think it's an interesting invitation. So I'm going to leave sort of the questions about perhaps, some policy implications and some sort of research implications to our Q&A. And really, thank you very, very, very much for your attention and for your very keen welcoming this morning, earlier today. So thank you very much. Danke.
Thank you, Veronica. There are a whole number of things in my own mind that have started from that presentation. First of all, I'm going to have to think about the song Eye of the Tiger in a new way, I think. And also, I think the sense in which some of the points around the question that learning is long-lasting and transformative, the whole points around thinking dispositions and habits of thinking has posed to me some really central questions that not only relevant for these 2 days, this conference, but what's happening in the world today. And to me, as was said earlier in one of the introductions, the sense in which the observations that you've raised are so timely in terms of all the things that are happening in the world today. So I just want to say thank you very much, Veronica, for this inspiring keynote presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much.